In a neighborhood where the lines between wealth and struggle were sharper than ever, something extraordinary was about to unfold. Behind the tall gates of a millionaire's mansion lived a young boy whose legs refused to carry him, whose laughter had grown silent and whose father's fortune could not buy him the one thing he longed for: hope. But destiny has a way of arriving in the most unexpected forms. And on an ordinary morning, while the sound of garbage trucks echoed down the street, a man in a worn uniform carrying the weight of years of hard work unknowingly stepped into a story that would change lives forever. No one could have predicted that a black garbage man, ignored by many, dismissed by some, would be the one to bring movement where there was stillness, and joy where there was only sorrow. What started as a simple moment of kindness would unravel into a chain of events that silenced prejudice, shattered pride, and proved that miracles often arrive dressed in the most humble ways. This isn't just about dance, it's about courage, resilience, and the power of humanity in its purest form. The world outside the grand iron gates of the Donovan estate looked nothing like the world within. On the outside, cracked sidewalks, faded paint on old storefronts, and families scraping by on the rhythm of survival. But inside those gates, wealth gleamed in every corner, the sweeping driveway lined with imported trees, the marble steps leading to a mansion whose windows reflected not just sunlight, but power. This was the home of Richard Donovan, a man whose name was spoken in boardrooms and business journals, a man who had climbed the ladder of success with relentless determination. To the world, he had everything: status, influence, fortune beyond imagination. But behind those polished doors, a pain lingered that not even money could mend. His only son, Michael, born with a condition that weakened his legs, had grown up in a world where he could see children running but never join them, hear laughter in parks but never chase it. His wheelchair had become both his seat and his prison. Michael's days were often silent, save for the hum of machines and the footsteps of caretakers. Tutors came and went, offering lessons in math and literature, but what the boy needed most, joy, companionship, freedom, was something that no curriculum could provide. Richard, despite his wealth, watched helplessly as his son's spirit dimmed a little more with each passing year. He could buy the best doctors, the finest therapies, but he could not buy hope. And while the mansion lived in silence, outside its walls life carried on. Every Tuesday and Friday morning, long before the sun fully stretched across the sky, a garbage truck rolled down the street with its familiar groan. Its driver, a tall black man named Jamal Carter, had been on this route for nearly a decade. To many, he was just the garbage guy, a man who came and went without a second thought. But to those who truly looked, there was something different about Jamal. His spirit was unshaken, his smile unfading, and though life had not given him riches, it had given him rhythm, an unshakable joy that seemed to live in his very bones. Neighbors would sometimes notice how Jamal moved to music only he could hear, tapping his feet as he worked, nodding his head as if every sound of the morning was part of some invisible song. Children on the block had learned to look forward to his visits because sometimes, if the day was right, he would break into little bursts of dance while lifting bags into the truck. It was a simple thing, but it was enough to make children laugh, to make strangers smile, and to remind people, if only for a moment, that joy could bloom in unexpected places. And so, two worlds coexisted, separated by gates, wealth, and silence. One boy locked in a mansion with everything except the freedom to feel alive, and one man, dismissed by most, who carried with him the one thing no money could buy: the power to spread joy. Neither knew it yet, but their paths were about to cross. And when they did, the ripples would stretch far beyond a driveway, a mansion, or even a neighborhood. On an ordinary Tuesday morning, Michael sat by the wide glass window of the Donovan estate, watching the world move beyond the gates. He had grown used to the quiet of his home, the hush of staff speaking softly, the routine of lessons and therapy sessions. But outside, he watched life with hungry eyes, the joggers, the dogs, the cars humming by. And most of all, he waited for the sound he had come to love, the deep, clunky growl of the garbage truck. It wasn't the truck itself that fascinated him, but the man who leapt off the back with energy that seemed limitless. Michael had noticed him months ago. Jamal, the garbage man who never walked but moved, as if every step carried rhythm. As if the world itself played a beat just for him. Michael would see him bobbing his head, sometimes twirling a garbage can as though it were part of a dance. What others dismissed as strange, Michael saw as magic. On that morning, as Jamal lifted bins with practiced ease, he caught sight of the boy in the window. Their eyes met, just for a moment. But in that instant, Michael felt something stir. Jamal didn't look at him with pity, as so many did. He smiled, wide and genuine, and tipped an imaginary hat as if greeting an equal. For Michael, that was rare. People often saw the wheelchair first and him second. But Jamal saw him. As the weeks went by, their silent exchanges grew. Michael would wave shyly, and Jamal would break into a little spin or shuffle, making the boy laugh. That laughter, once buried under years of loneliness, slowly began to return. Richard noticed it too, the faint spark in his son's eyes whenever the garbage truck appeared. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence. But as the pattern repeated, curiosity began to grow. One morning, fate took its turn. Michael's nurse wheeled him down the long driveway for some fresh air just as Jamal arrived. For the first time, there were no gates, no glass between them. Jamal hopped off the truck, greeted the nurse politely, and then crouched down to Michael's level. He didn't say much at first, just gave the boy a smile that seemed to hold more warmth than the sun overhead. Then, without warning, he began to tap his feet against the pavement, humming softly, his body swaying to a rhythm only he seemed to hear. Michael's eyes widened. Jamal clapped his hands, spun lightly, and then gave the boy a nod, as if inviting him into this private world of rhythm. Michael hesitated, then lifted his arms, moving them awkwardly in the air. It wasn't much, but it was movement. Movement born not of therapy or obligation, but of joy. For the first time in his life, Michael wasn't a patient. He was a dancer. The nurse, startled at first, couldn't help but smile. She later told Richard what had happened, and for the first time in years, the millionaire felt something stir that money had never bought him. Hope. He began watching from the balcony on those mornings, seeing his son light up in ways doctors had never managed to spark. Jamal wasn't just collecting trash. He was collecting the broken pieces of a boy's spirit and stitching them back together, with rhythm. But soon, whispers began to spread among the staff and neighbors. Some frowned upon the sight of the garbage man spending time with the Donovan boy. Others murmured about boundaries, about propriety. To them, Jamal was still just a worker, someone who should know his place. And yet what they dismissed as improper, Michael clung to as salvation. Because in those few minutes each week, the world felt different, lighter, freer, alive. And slowly, what began as a simple smile through glass was building towards something that neither the Donovan family nor the neighborhood could ever have expected. The summer sun blazed down on Donovan Estate, its manicured lawns trimmed to perfection, its towering gates casting long shadows across the driveway. But inside, something entirely imperfect was unfolding. For weeks, Jamal's visits had grown into small moments of transformation, minutes of dance, laughter, and light in a boy's world that had long been confined to quiet sorrow. Yet not everyone celebrated these changes. The staff whispered. The neighbors frowned. Richard Donovan, the millionaire father, found himself caught in the crossfire of his own emotions. He had spent millions on doctors, trainers, and specialists, yet none of them had managed to spark what Jamal, the garbage man, was stirring inside his son. At first, Richard's pride bristled. How could years of medical expertise be rivaled by a man who came every Tuesday to empty trash bins? But beneath that pride was something deeper, something undeniable. He saw his son's eyes shine again, and he hadn't seen that in years. Still, the storm broke when Jamal, sensing Michael's growing confidence, did something no one expected. One bright morning after finishing his route, he walked up the driveway with his signature grin. He crouched down beside Michael's wheelchair and said softly, "Ready?" And before anyone could stop him, Jamal placed his strong hands beneath the boy's arms and helped him rise. Gasps erupted from the nurse and a gardener nearby. For years, Michael had been told he might never stand. Yet there he was, legs trembling, arms gripping Jamal's shoulders, but standing. His face was a mixture of fear and awe, and then a laugh so pure it echoed through the driveway. Jamal steadied him, humming a beat, encouraging the boy to take the tiniest steps, shuffling his feet as though following the rhythm of life itself. From the mansion's balcony, Richard watched with wide eyes. His heart pounded as if each beat was screaming at him, "Is this real? Is this possible?" Tears stung his eyes, but before he could process what was happening, the estate gates swung open. A group of neighbors had gathered, their arms crossed, their faces tight with judgment. One woman muttered loud enough for others to hear, "This is inappropriate, letting the garbage man play doctor." Another hissed, "It's dangerous, he could hurt the boy." Richard stormed down the stairs, his presence commanding silence. For a moment, everyone froze, waiting to see which side he would take. Would he chastise Jamal? Would he protect his son from what they claimed was recklessness? The weight of privilege, pride, and prejudice hung heavy in the air. But then Michael spoke, not with words, but with his body. His legs wobbled, but he clung tighter to Jamal, refusing to sit back down. His eyes locked on his father's, pleading silently, "Don't take this from me. Don't take away the one person who makes me feel alive." Richard's chest tightened. His mind replayed the years of sterile hospital rooms, the endless checkups, the countless times his son had broken down in frustration, asking why he wasn't like other kids. And now, in the arms of a man society dismissed as just a garbage worker, Michael was not broken. He was whole. With a deep breath, Richard crossed the driveway. Everyone held theirs, expecting confrontation. But instead of anger, Richard placed his hand gently on his son's shoulder. He whispered, his voice breaking, "I see you, son. I see you." The neighbors shifted uncomfortably, their whispers faltering. Jamal gave Richard a steady look as though asking silently, "Do you trust me?" Richard's nod was small, but it was enough. Jamal grinned, steadied Michael, and together they took 3 trembling steps forward. Not far, not fast, but monumental. Tears streamed down Michael's cheeks, and for the first time tears streamed down Richard's too. Around them, silence replaced gossip. The sight of a millionaire's disabled son finding freedom in the arms of a black garbage man shattered more than just prejudice. It shattered the illusion that status, wealth, or power defined worth. At that moment, the entire neighborhood bore witness to a miracle not born of money but of humanity. And while the community would never be the same again, one truth became clear. The boy who had once been bound to his chair had now taken his first steps toward freedom, guided not by a doctor, not by a therapist, but by the rhythm of a man society had overlooked. In the days that followed, the story of Michael's first steps spread far beyond the Donovan estate. The neighbors who once whispered now spoke with awe. Some admitted they had misjudged Jamal. Others struggled to reconcile their prejudice with the miracle they had seen. But for Richard Donovan, none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the way his son looked at him, full of pride, courage, and a joy he thought was gone forever. Jamal didn't stop visiting. He came back week after week, not as the garbage man people dismissed, but as a mentor, a friend, and in many ways a healer. Each visit brought new progress. Michael learning to balance longer, taking a few more steps, moving with rhythm instead of fear. Every shuffle forward was a reminder that limitations are not always permanent, and that healing comes in many forms, sometimes wrapped in uniforms society overlooks. The neighborhood began to change too. The walls of silence, judgment, and division began to crack. People who had spent years hiding behind titles, wealth, and power were forced to face a truth that was undeniable. Compassion can't be bought, and dignity doesn't come with a price. But for Jamal, none of this was about recognition. He didn't crave praise, he didn't seek reward. All he wanted was to see a child smile, to remind a boy that he was more than his condition, and to show a father that sometimes miracles arrive disguised as ordinary men doing extraordinary things. And perhaps the greatest change happened within Richard himself. Once proud, once distant, once consumed by control, he began to see the world differently. For the first time in years, he listened. He listened to his son's laughter, to Jamal's wisdom, and to the humbling realization that no amount of money could have done what compassion had achieved. Michael's steps were small, but their impact was massive. They sparked conversations about humility, about respect, about seeing people for who they are rather than what they wear or what job they do. So the next time you see someone society tends to overlook, a worker on the street, a man in a uniform, someone whose story you think you already know, ask yourself, what if they are the one carrying the very miracle you've been waiting for? Because as Michael and Jamal proved, sometimes the most extraordinary transformations don't come from power, privilege, or wealth. They come from the simple, unshakable rhythm of kindness. The Donovan estate had always been a fortress, tall gates, manicured lawns, and a silence that spoke more of status than warmth. But after that afternoon, something shifted in ways no one could have predicted. For the first time, the gates seemed less like barriers and more like open doors. Because what unfolded on that property wasn't just about a boy taking his first steps, it was about a community taking its first steps toward healing, humility, and humanity. News spread quickly, carried not just by whispers, but by awe. Some neighbors confessed they had stood by for years, watching Richard Donovan's pride distance him from everyone. They had judged Jamal too, dismissing him as just the garbage man. Yet now it was undeniable. The man they had overlooked had unlocked a miracle no amount of wealth or privilege could buy. And in that truth, people began to see themselves differently. But the deepest transformation was happening inside the Donovan household. For Richard, the proud millionaire who had once seen the world as a ledger of profit and loss, Jamal's presence tore down walls he didn't even know he had built. He began to watch more closely, not just the slow, shaky steps of his son, but the way Jamal carried himself, with patience, with joy, with a dignity that didn't need validation. Richard realized that all the tutors, doctors, and specialists he had hired had brought skill, but none had brought soul. Jamal had given his son something priceless, the belief that movement, however small, was worth celebrating. Michael, too, was blossoming. Each step was no longer an isolated victory. It became a rhythm, a dance of hope. His laughter filled the halls again, echoing louder than the silence of his disability ever had. His progress wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The boy who once felt trapped inside his own body now carried himself with a new lightness, as if the very act of moving even shakily was proof that he was free. Jamal never sought recognition. He never treated Michael's recovery as a performance. Instead, he came back day after day, showing up with the same steady smile, the same willingness to try, the same rhythm that had first sparked Michael's courage. He didn't demand gratitude. He didn't remind Richard of what he had done. He simply kept showing up, because sometimes showing up is the greatest gift one human being can give another. Soon, neighbors who once turned away began stopping by. They didn't come to gawk, but to witness, to remind themselves that kindness exists in unexpected places, to relearn that dignity isn't tied to wealth or status, but to how we treat each other in the small hidden moments when nobody's watching. And for Richard Donovan, the proudest moment wasn't his wealth, his property, or his reputation. It was watching his son stand tall, holding on to Jamal's hands and realizing that the greatest investment he could ever make was not in stocks or estates or legacies, but in people. Michael's first steps were more than progress. They were proof. Proof that healing can come from places we least expect. Proof that the worth of a man is never measured by the uniform he wears. proof that hope, once sparked, spreads faster than fear. So the next time you walk past someone the world dismisses, someone working a job that others call beneath them, someone society tries to overlook, ask yourself, what if they're carrying the miracle you've been waiting for? Because sometimes it only takes one act of compassion, one spark of kindness to turn an ordinary afternoon into the beginning of an extraordinary transformation.